explosion rocking Ukraine capital Kyiv just a short time ago, and we're capturing all of it right now. Russian forces are also bearing down on Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, with a barrage of artillery fire. It is nighttime there already. It is 7 p.m. as we start this hour. Russian and Ukrainian negotiators are holding their first talk since the war began. So they were going to do that along the border. That process has begun. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, joined to you today by my co-host, Emily Campagno. And in for Kaylee is Kennedy. We're glad she's here. Along with Kennedy and General Kellogg, Kaylee McEnany. The first Ukraine-Russia peace talks have reportedly just wrapped up with no results. The two sides have reportedly agreed to meet at the Polish-Belarus border in the coming days. All this as the United States condemns Vladimir Putin for putting his nuclear forces on high alert. The Ukrainian people put up a fierce fight. They continue to do that. You know that. We're watching it. The world is. Russian forces have failed to take any of their major cities. Trey Yinks is live for us in Kyiv, where there were just a few heavy explosions a few minutes ago. Trey.
Harris, good afternoon. There was just a massive explosion felt in downtown Kyiv. It rocked the windows of the hotel we're at here. I think we have some video captured by my cameraman, David Gamliel. He saw a flash on the skyline, and we are getting reports that surface-to-air defense systems were used off in the distance as the Ukrainians appear to be trying to take down a Russian jet that conducted this airstrike. This is all preliminary information, but early reports indicate this Russian airstrike targeted a radar communications military center just southeast of the city. This is significant as the day has been quite calm. There were civilians in the streets of the Ukrainian capital. They were gathering supplies. They came up from underground where they spent the night in bomb shelters. The city is about to go back into curfew at this hour. Right now, there are concerns that the Russians are looking to surround the capital of Kyiv. U.S. defense officials warning of that earlier today. You mentioned those peace talks that took place today between the Ukrainians and the Russians along the border with Belarus. This followed a phone call yesterday between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. Now, it also follows a call between the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and the French president, Emmanuel Macron. And I think this call really gives you some information that is critical when we talk about the possibility of peace in this conflict. Early reports, according to the French, indicate that Vladimir Putin wants multiple things from the Ukrainians in order to stop his invasion into this country. Two of those agenda items have to do with demilitarization of Ukraine and also recognizing an area of land called Crimea that was annexed in 2014, two things that are likely not to happen here in Ukraine. Back to you.
Trey, thank you very much. And, you know, that video just reminds us of how many places civilians are in harm's way in all of this. Kaylee, I want to talk with you first about this idea of Russia targeting civilians and how much pressure they're willing to put on away from military targets. It is heartbreaking.
It's grotesque. I mean, children, we know that schools have been hit. Civilians are being targeted, contrary to what we are being told. And I wonder, you know, General Kellogg would know better than I on this. I do wonder the reaction of Russian forces, because apparently, you know, Russia is being told we're not in war. Putin's saying that this is denazification is his word. He's saying we're not at war, but apparently these Russian soldiers are going in. Some of them thinking that they're going to be welcomed as liberators, like the Ukrainians want this, and they're shocked when they're experiencing not open arms, but fierce resistance as the Ukrainian people, innocent people, are being targeted, including their children. And I just wonder how long this will hold up, because I'm not even sure some of the Russian troops will stand for this. Do they want to be at The Hague? Do they want to be accused of war crimes when this is all over? Because indeed they will.
Well, and when I talked with Ambassador Taylor last hour, he said the world actually has the appetite to see that through. Like, that's not just a hollow threat for Putin. That's his reality. This could be the end of everything for him when they start to pursue him. I do want to ask this as we're looking at these pictures. And, you know, you mentioned General Kellogg, so let's pull him in. How would you describe how the Russians on the ground are moving right now?
Well, hi, Harris. I don't think they're doing very well at all. They've been delayed. They're slow. You know, they're following a tactic called IFR, I follow roads. I kind of wish that we had our air forces up against them, because we would have eliminated them almost immediately. But the Ukrainian resistance has been incredibly strong. and pushing them back. I think they thought they were going to be into Kyiv in a relatively short period of time, be able to decapitate the government, and they've been totally unable to do it. And I think that really does start to stress them to a large degree. You only can keep troops like that moving so long, so far before they start questioning, what's going on, what's happening. What Kayleigh said a second ago about the Russian soldiers, more importantly, I think their leadership is starting to say, hey, what's going on? You see some of the body language out of their Defense Secretary Shoigu, or Gerasimov, who's their equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. You look at them and you go, they're probably thinking, boy, this isn't going like we thought it was going to go, and we're having some real problems. And it's basically, it's embarrassing the Russian army to the rest of the world. The rest of the world is looking at this and going, these guys aren't 10 feet tall. They're not 8 feet tall. They're like about 3.5. They are not performing well at all. And these are their frontline units. These are not units that are reserve units. They're all high-end units.
That's really important because, part of this, I know Jennifer Griffin had reported with me a few days ago that this would be about a third of the number of armed forces that Russia would have. But what you're saying is it absolutely matters which ones you send in first and what you'd fold in later. Because if you're following roads, that IFR, that is easier to fight. You know exactly where they're going. And then we have to start to wonder about those unconfirmed reports, but there are so many of them of Russians hitting that beach a few days ago and asking for directions. I mean, if any of that folklore is factual and there's evidence of that, even their best is not very good.
Yeah, Harris, I really mean this about the Russian army. I mean, there's a lot of us watching going, boy, we've heard so many stories about the Russian army. This reminds me of what we were told about the Iraqi army years ago before the first Desert War, when, these guys were 10 feet tall. They fought the Iranians. They were nothing. And you look at the Russian army right now, there's a lot of people going, we're really afraid of these guys. And I'm sure that their senior leaders are saying the same thing. They're embarrassed by it. And frankly, they're being handed a lot of problems. I didn't say what I was going to say, but
I know you
they've got some big problems right now.
Oh, it's only noon in the East, but we appreciate that, General. Emily, your top-line thoughts on this today?
Well, General, I'm curious for your feedback on the fact that we now know, as of about 9:45 Eastern time this morning, that Ukrainian President Zelensky and the representative of Russia are in their third round of their peace talks negotiations. And this is on the heel of Zelensky saying that these next 24 hours would be crucial. And I thought it was amazing in his address when he said, when I planned to become a president, I said that each of us is the president. And he went on to say, because we are all responsible for our state, for our beautiful Ukraine, and now it has happened that each of us is a warrior. And along the backdrop of this incredible resistance the Ukrainians have been putting forth, what are your thoughts on his position of power and his leverage as he enters these peace talks, which the Russian representative has said they will only resume if their needs are unconditionally met?
Yeah, Emily, thanks. You know something? I want Zelensky on my team. He is a great leader. He's a charismatic leader. It's very clear. I kind of hoped he'd gone to the talks up in Belarus and he was willing to accept Russia's surrender. That's kind of the attitude he's got. I think it's great. And there's an old saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight that counts, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And they are showing really incredible bravery and incredible fortitude. And it's all based on President Zelensky. When President Zelensky said, I don't need an air raid, I need ammunition, it kind of set a tone. And that tone is critical. There's an old Napoleon's aphorism that says the moral to the physical is 3:1. What that means is the heart of an army sometimes means more than the physical part of an army, the equipment that you've got. If you are willing to fight to the bitter end, then you can destroy a lot of elements and forces that are much greater than you are. We've proven that in American history as well in some of our battles. So I think, when you look what Zelensky has done and you look at what he's pushed back on, that's the reason I think if I was Russia, I'd be very concerned right now. In my opinion, today, Russia is losing this fight. And there's a lot of reasons they're losing it, but they are showing the whole world that they can be beat, and he's proven it today.
Last hour you were with me, General Kellogg, and we were talking about that southern border. And Kennedy, one of the things that Bill Hemmer had pointed out upstairs on the mez is that if the Russians can take one part of that that country on the southern side, they can connect the breakaway republics, which gives them more of a wall and a base. You know, I mean, reports of their soldiers being hungry. You got to have access. That's what Belarus has been for them. It's been access to supplies and whatnot.
Yes, and it seems like Belarus is really the only winner here because they are a puppet state of Russia. They are now the go-between, the propaganda arm, and you know, Russia is using them as a mediator, but really they are truly an extension of the Kremlin and also not to be trusted. But it's interesting because if somehow this all works out and Vladimir Putin does in fact have a cohesive endgame and he takes Ukraine, he now has 5 new NATO neighbors. Think about that. He's got Moldova, he's got Romania, he's got Slovenia, he's got Poland, he's got all of these new enemies who are part of an alliance, regardless of how you feel about NATO. And, you know, he's lied to the Russian people. He's obviously lied to the military. I think he's lying to himself that there's going to be a positive outcome here. And it just makes you wonder, what has his endgame been all along? Because, myself included, everyone has been wrong about this, especially trying to read what he's doing, where he's going, and why he's doing.
That is such a great point. And Secretary Rice told me yesterday on Fox News Sunday that this isn't the Putin that she has always known. So we don't know his endgame. We also potentially don't really know this version of him. So it's hard to predict. You know, it was Congressman Brian Mast of Florida last hour who talked about putting militarized zones when this whole thing comes to an end. He was at least optimistic that we're headed in that direction as an end period. I wonder what that would look like. We'd have to do basically what we did in South Korea and North Korea times all of those countries that you talked about.
And my Romanian people. So, you know, my thoughts are obviously with everyone in the region. On Stuart Varney just a little bit ago, we saw that mother in the bomb shelter with her 3 children. Yeah. You think about, you know, those incredible stories. But, you know, the other thing that worries me, we've heard that Putin has put his nuclear team, his retaliation team, on
high alert.
On high alert, exactly. It's like, what is he going to strike first? You know, is he going to strike the United States? Is he going to strike his enemies in the West? Is he going to use nuclear devices on Ukraine?
Well, and Emily, when you see all those people in the streets of Moscow who are risking their lives just to protest, we don't know how the inner circle feels about Putin right now. I mean, we don't know if he's still going to be sitting there doing this. We have no idea what they'll do politically over there. We will continue to cover it. Let's go. Coming up, Vladimir Putin apparently did not factor this into his plans. As Kennedy was just saying, and we all have here, the Ukrainian people, from beauty queens to newlyweds to the president, are helping their outgunned military take the fight to the Russian war machine.
At first, we were scared, really scared. But now we are ready to fight. And fight like hell. So